Sometimes a particular level in a video game will strive to capture the feeling of a certain season. You're probably familiar with the scores of different winter levels, all with varying degrees of Christmas to them, or maybe Halloween themed levels, which balance the dark coldness of late fall with the warm mythicism of spirits and jack-o'-lanterns. But I think one season that goes unappreciated in the medium of games is summer. Because sure, you could point to any number of tropical levels and say they capture the feeling of summer, but I disagree. These are more year-round levels, which don't go for any specific season. Any location characterized by palm trees, white sand beaches, and the availability of spiked smoothies maintains its appeal consistently, whether that's in winter or summer. What makes summer so special isn't the warm, sunny weather. It's the fact that you know it won't last long. The countdown to the end of summer starts as soon as the season begins. However, in a video game, a season can be as short or as long as the designers wish, so the fleeting nature of summer doesn't always play as much of a factor. But the aesthetics can still fill a large role here, and when it comes to capturing the feeling of summer in this regard, I can't think of a level that does it better than the Honeyhive Galaxy. The Honeyhive Galaxy is the second main world in Super Mario Galaxy, after the Good Egg Galaxy. We covered all the details of that galaxy, from yolks to whites, in the previous video in this series, so if you haven't checked that out yet, I'd recommend watching that first. While the first world of a video game has the important job of introducing the game's mechanics to the player, the second world has the equally critical job of sticking the landing. And thankfully, there's nothing stickier than honey. Although, I suppose glue is stickier than honey. It's not like you're buying Gorilla Honey when you need to put a vase back together. Also, cement is definitely stickier than honey. There's no cement-themed galaxy though, that would be super lame. Anyway, if a picture is worth 1,000 words, then a video game is probably worth several billion. So once again, let's hold on this landing shot for a moment, because it has a lot to say. The camera is pointed at an upward angle, giving us a wide view of many parts of this galaxy's main planet. There's more going on here than there was in the first planet of the Good Egg Galaxy, and this landing shot gives us an overview of what to expect. We can see rolling boulders, a swing, a giant waterfall, and an appropriately themed NPC, the honeybee. Or perhaps what's most important about this starting view is the fact that our goal is placed clearly in the middle, the cave behind the waterfall. This means that even though there's a good bit to do here, the level designers can proceed with the guarantee that every player has seen the goal ahead of them. While it's not at the level of a stage in Super Mario 64 or Sunshine, this main planet does veer into the more sandboxy approach of those games. Giving player more control over where they go means you should also give them more control over what they see. For this reason, the Honeyhive Galaxy is the first to give the player some semblance of camera control. Changing the camera angle isn't as smooth as it is in Super Mario Sunshine or Odyssey, and we can only move it horizontally, not vertically. I think this is for two reasons. The first is that while this particular area is more open, Super Mario Galaxy overall is still very linear. The designers have to keep the player looking ahead at virtually all times, and locking the camera to specific angles, even when they let the player pick the angles, does help remove any likelihood of player error. The second reason for this restriction is that Super Mario Galaxy was originally a Wii game, and the Wii Remote nunchuck setup didn't have a second analog stick. This meant that the camera control was done through the Wii Remote's D-pad, which translates to more rigid movement, rather than being able to move an analog stick however we may please. It would have been nice if they had remapped those controls for the Wii Classic controller, but I'm pretty sure Nintendo forgot about that one the very second it was released. It would have also been nice if they had adjusted it for the 3D All-Stars version, but you can't even buy that anymore, so their line of thinking was probably, who cares? Overall, I have mixed feelings about the camera in Super Mario Galaxy. It certainly wasn't easy to design, and there's a lot of areas where the development team likely did the best they could, but at the same time, there's spots where I think they could have done better. Moving on to the actual level design, there's a few secrets to be found around the starting area, like this pipe in the upper right. There's also the letter M in star bits at the start that acts as a reward for learning how to move the camera. But because this is in space, we could be looking at it upside down and it's actually a W for Wario. These are the kinds of answerless questions that Super Mario Galaxy constantly makes us ask ourselves. However, the most interesting part of this main planet, and I think what gives it the more sandboxy feel, is this swing. It's simple, yes, but it offers a level of interactivity not seen in many other places throughout the game. In most of Super Mario Galaxy, our interaction with the environment is limited to running on platforms and planets, jumping between them, or spinning into enemies and objects. Not that this is a bad thing, because it allows the level design to come to the forefront of the experience, which is why I'm making this series about the game's level design. Overall, each world is incredibly static, not including some scripted events. So this swing perplexes me. Why is it here of all places? We don't need to use it in this galaxy's missions, so it's just here to mess around on. But why put it in the second level, knowing that there will be few elements like it throughout the rest of the game? Don't get me wrong, I like that the swing is here, but I don't understand it. Maybe some parts of the level design are there simply to be there, just to make the player go, hey, this is pretty fun. Something that extends well beyond the scope of pretty fun would be one of my favorite power-ups from any Mario game. The bee mushroom. First of all, let's talk about its design. It's impeccable. The suit is one I would happily wear as a Halloween costume. The hat always reminded me of those beanies with brims that were popular in the early 2000s. Remember those? The kid in Elf had one. Common wore one on the cover of his album B, and that's a classic record. I remember I wore one in 5th grade because the 6th graders in my school wore them, and I wanted to be like them. Okay, obviously I bought this hat as a joke for this video, but the reason I got this one in particular out of all the different ones they had on Amazon, because this one actually has built-in goggles on the back. The material is actually pretty good, but could you picture someone wearing this unironically? I look like a rejected Marvel character. Can you imagine if you wore this skiing and you had to call for help on the slope? I think I'd just rather die. But to get back to B Mario and not on the hat choice on the B album, the awesome aesthetics don't end with Mario shedding his tacky red and blue outfit. I really like how this spin move makes it look like a swirl of honey. And hey, with drip like this, he's fit to be on the front of a cereal box. Mario can fly with his power-up too, but in a way that gives him a sense of weight that adds to the bee-like feeling. The range is limited, with the meter showing how much juice we have left. I'm happy that Nintendo eventually learned that when you have a meter that only does one thing, you don't need a word on top of it telling the player what it's for, even if that did take 10 years. There's other bee-themed benefits to the power-up, like being able to climb on honeycombs and walk on flowers. These do a good job of adding to the idea of being a bee. But one I would have liked to see would be honey not slowing us down when we walk through it. One thing I didn't really notice until playing through the game again for these videos is that the bug enemies will treat us differently based on whether we have the bee mushroom or not. When we're regular Mario, they'll run away from us, but when we're bee Mario, they'll go right for an attack. It's a minor detail in the grand scheme of things, but I think it's one that may have served as inspiration for Super Mario Odyssey. In that game, many different characters and enemies will react differently based on what form Mario takes, which is essentially an expanded version of how these bugs work in Galaxy. It's always cool to see the seeds of one game being planted in another, and I wouldn't be surprised if Odyssey's dynamic reactions were directly based off of this. These enemies attacking us isn't the only bit of give and take that the bee suit brings. We can't long jump or triple jump, plus we'll lose our powers if we come into contact with water. The bee suit isn't the only power-up in Super Mario Galaxy that carries negatives as well as positives, but we'll get to those in a later episode. When we touch water in bee form, we don't take damage, but I would still call it a punishment because most of the time we need to be Bee Mario in order to progress. In this vein, it's similar to the bouncy bushes from the last galaxy. This aspect of the suit makes this next planet interesting, in that it's covered with water. This means that, well, aesthetically it's water, mechanically it's not that far from lava. That's one of the biggest benefits of power-ups that you can have in a game like this. They shouldn't just give us an extra ability, they should change how we view the world around us and how the world views us. Another game that does this well is Banjo-Kazooie, with its various transformations. It's something I wish Super Mario Galaxy had done more of, because much of the time, the power-ups take a back seat to the level design. This isn't necessarily a negative, but sometimes I feel like the power-ups were included just to add a blurb on the back of the box, but we'll get to that later. Climbing on the honeycombs feels like a necessity when playing as a bee, and Mario Galaxy handles it well. One interesting thing is that the wall we climb on has its own horizontal gravity, so we're being pulled towards it. That is, until we touch a part of the wall that isn't a honeycomb, then we're pulled back down like normal. I think the way the designers have implemented the gravity with the level design is excellent. It shows how gravity can be used to influence gameplay in small areas to make big differences. Similarly, the Honey Queen also has her own center of gravity, although it's not as needed as the honeycomb wall because there's no jumping required while we're scouring her body for star chips. Maybe this means that her having her own gravity is more of a thematic decision. She is the queen after all, and everything in this galaxy should revolve around her. Once we blast out, we meet Captain Toad in his first ever appearance. I don't have too much to say about him, besides the fact that it's funny that he can honestly mistake a mustache man in a bee costume as a real bee. But I do want to say, if you haven't played Captain Toad Treasure Tracker, I highly recommend it. It's a fantastic little puzzle game and is honestly one of my favorite Switch games, period. The next mission in the Honeyhive Galaxy is Trouble on the Tower. From the starting shot, we can see the launch star at the top of the mountain, which is a nice touch. Other than that, I don't have too much to say about this first segment, so let's take this as another opportunity to sit back and appreciate the music. I think it matches the visuals of the level as being bright, bouncy, and summery. So let's take a listen. Up here we meet Gilboard, who isn't a sign that we read, but rather a sign that we talk to. He's the first of 4 sentient signs present in Mario Galaxy, the others being Billboard, Philboard, and Jillboard. I'm not quite sure why they decided to give these 4 signs in particular a bit of characterization. Maybe they were planning to use them in future Mario games, which didn't end up happening. They're strange, but they add some surprise to the experience, which is always nice. After launching off, we end up with these 2 planets that look like Cat in the Hat hats. I really like these longer, more cylindrical planets that Super Mario Galaxy has. They really show off how gravity can be used in interesting ways. There's more of these types of planets in different galaxies, and they're consistently impressive. Right after this brief detour, we end up back on the main planet again, in a fairly traditional obstacle course for a 3D platformer. Our old friend the swing makes an appearance, but we can also just long jump straight past it, so it's not like it's something we need to learn how to use. Down at this lower area, we can find our first life mushroom. I suppose it's technically a new power-up, but it doesn't have any unique benefits aside from doubling Mario's health. Because of this, I always wondered why they didn't use the classic super mushroom, which functions in the same way as the 2D games. Life Mushroom never appeared in any of the games besides Galaxy 1 and 2, so it's not like it ended up becoming its own thing down the line. It's a different situation from the Rainbow Star, because unlike the Rainbow Star, there's nothing else that the Super Mushroom could be easily confused with. I could make the same argument about the hearts in Super Mario Odyssey, and why they aren't just Super Mushrooms, but at the end of the day, I guess it comes down to the desires of the development team at the time, and them wanting to create items that feel appropriate for the particular game they're working on, without too much concern for consistency across the series. It's definitely something that Mario fans care more about than Nintendo themselves. Guilty. From here, we take the windmill up, which reminds me of the one in Bianco Hills from Sunshine, and meet this mission's boss. Evolution clearly didn't do the Mandibugs any favors by printing the ground pound symbol on their backs, but from the player's perspective, it provides an unintrusive way of instructing us on how to defeat the boss. One thing I find funny is that we don't get the animation that bosses typically have until we stomp on the little buddy on the big one's back. It makes you wonder just how good of a guy is Mario. In the last Galaxy, he destroyed a newborn baby. Now he's killing animals in front of each other with no remorse. Although, this guy only takes 2 hits instead of the usual 3 for bosses, so maybe he doesn't count as the full boss in the eyes of the designers. Either way, collecting this star will take us to the next mission, Big Bad Bugaboom. Right from the start of this level, the game conveys the feeling to us that something's off. First of all, we see this bee appearing to have a panic attack, plus the music is sped up, giving a more frantic vibe than we had in previous missions. I guess the Mandibugs are out for revenge for Mario killing the ones at the top of the tower in the last mission, because now they're out in full force. Even though they were present the last time around, I think it's smart to include them again here, in order to really hammer home the virtue of learning the ground pound move. Because ground pounding is the only way to defeat them, learning learning how to do the move becomes a necessity in this level and the last. Anyone who's played another 3D Mario game probably won't have much trouble getting a hang of it, but it is important to make sure new players are able to pull it off consistently. The ground pound is the only move of Mario's to require 2 different button presses, one to jump in the air and another to execute an attack. Even though this might be second nature to a lot of players, Mario games are always designed with newcomers in mind, so I think it's important to judge them by how well they teach new players the mechanics. At the time of its release, Super Mario Galaxy was the highest selling 3D Mario game, over 64 in Sunshine, so this fact alone means it was likely that it was a lot of players' first 3D Mario. Maybe it was even your first 3D Mario. Just as a side note, when I was double checking the numbers on this, one interesting thing I found was that Super Mario Sunshine actually sold more copies through the 3D All-Stars version than it did on the GameCube. That means there's more people who played Sunshine on the Switch than during its original release. I know when you consider the system sales of each console, that makes sense, but still, it feels weird. This mission in Honeyhive is by far the shortest of the 3. After we're done exploring the right side of the main planet, which is largely unchanged from the last time around, we end up with the boss fight. Bugaboom doesn't have many notable qualities as a boss, besides the fact that he looks like one of the early area Pokemon you'd encounter in one of the Game Boy Advance era games. However, I do find the planet he's on a little peculiar. See, we're clearly intended to use the bee mushroom throughout this fight, thanks to the fact that one is given to us right at the start. Plus, there's one available during the fight itself. There's water on the ground, which makes sense as motivation to stay in the air whenever possible, but I don't understand why it's only on half the planet. Overall, it's extremely easy to just avoid that half of the planet if we don't want to risk losing our bee suit, and there's no downside to doing so. There's no advantages over on the wet side that aren't present on the dry side. I think in ideal level design, especially for a boss fight, there should have been an element of risk and reward to make the gameplay more exciting. It's like the game designer had added the risk part here, but forgot to add the reward. Although the timing to get hovering over him can be tricky, Bugaboom is an easy boss fight, and coming in at the end of a short mission can feel underwhelming. Maybe if there was more leading up to him, a simple fight like this would be more appropriate. But on the whole, the Honeyhive Galaxy is a highlight of the game, and one of my favorite galaxies. I feel like I'm going to be saying that a lot throughout this series, but in the case of this one, it's absolutely true. There's so much that this world simply does right. It introduces a power-up that's become emblematic of the game as a whole, gives the player more breathing room to explore and test out their abilities, and wraps it all up in fantastic visuals and music. It tells the player that no, the Good Egg Galaxy wasn't just a fluke. The whole game is actually this good. It's pure, raw, and unfiltered fun. But that'll be the end of our discussion on it. On the next installment of this series, we'll be testing our long jump skills, collecting silver stars, and slingshotting our way across the space junk galaxy. I hope you'll join me there.